You're listening to Sports Radio Detroit.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Platte NBA Minute. As always, I'm your host, Chris Platte, and this is brought to you by Sports Radio Detroit. So be sure to go check out Sports Radio Detroit, give all their content a like, a thumbs up, share it, retweet it, whatever platform it applies to, do that because they make some great content. Now, let's get into today's episode. So today's episode is going to be a little bit of an all-star recap / what's going to happen in the future, as far as the last third of the season, roughly, as most teams have about 20 to 23 games left in the season. So first, let's start with All-Star Weekend. Now let's visit where I was right and where I was wrong. Where I was right was few and far between, as pretty much always is the case in All-Star Weekend. I've had some good years here and there, but for the most part, because these games are so gimmicky and so fluid as far as effort levels and things of that nature, they're very, very hard to predict, honestly. But let's start with where I was right. So the things I did call correctly, I did call USA winning in the World Challenge against Team World. And I was not correct, however. Kyle Kuzma ended up winning the MVP. I guessed Jason Tatum. Now, some other things I got right. I didn't technically pick Joe Harris. I technically picked Damian Lillard, but I said Harris was the dark horse for me to win it, and I think he has a really good chance. So that was kind of it. And Dame, by the way, did not do well in the three-point contest. He was one of the lowest scorers. Also, I was wrong about Dirk. Dirk played pretty well in the three-point contest. He actually got to the rack with 5 seconds left, which was something I honestly didn't see coming. He was pretty much the first to finish as far as time goes, the fastest-wise. Dennis Smith Jr., who I picked to win the dunk contest, he came in second. Diallo absolutely stole the show. That was a fantastic dunk. But yeah, so pretty much those were really the only things I was semi right about. Team LeBron also I picked winning, but I picked Harden for the MVP, and it was Kevin Durant. Overall, though, let's just talk about the weekend. It was fun. It was a good weekend. I thought the skills challenge was awesome with Tatum's half quarter to win was a huge surprise, and that was just a good game. The Team USA, Team World Rising Stars Challenge was great. I didn't watch too much of the celebrity. I kind of tuned in and then quickly tuned out. It's something that's unfortunately lost its appeal for me. But Saturday night-wise, like I said, the skills contest was great. It was exciting. It had a lot of mix-up in it. It's always an entertaining event. The three-point shootout was good. I thought that the field overall would have performed better, but there was some top-level performances from Buddy Hield, Steph Curry. Steph Curry in his hometown put up an absolute great show. Joe Harris obviously turned the lights out and won the contest. So overall, top-heavy-wise, as far as scores, you had a lot of scores in the mid-20s. So that was a good event. But some of those other scores, like Chris Middleton only struggling to get 11 and things of that nature, were a little bit harder. So overall, the field wasn't too great, but at the top it was very nice. The slam dunk contest, I liked it. I thought it was good. I loved Dennis Smith's dunk with J. Cole. I thought that was dope. I thought obviously Diallo stole the show with some show-stopping dunks. I mean, the fact that you could dunk over Shaq and put your elbow in the rim is just pure nasty. And even the other one where he played it safe and he bounce lobbed it to himself and had his head equal level with the rim before windmilling it all the way down from the waist back up was just absolutely insane how effortless he made that look. I'm here for him to compete in next year's dunk contest. I know I usually like the stars to perform in the dunk contest, but man, that kid can put on a show. He had the attitude, he had the confidence, the cockiness, he had it all, and I think he had all the elements that make a great slam dunk performer. So I'd be curious to see what he's got next year. So I was actually surprised by that. I was a little disheartened by some of the misses. Miles Bridges, Dennis Smith Jr. Those were kind of rough. Those always kind of take the wind out of the contest, unfortunately. But for the most part, overall, it was actually a better dunk contest than I expected. There was a lot of showmanship to it. There was some creativity. You got a nice balance this year. Really, the best balance since Levine and Aaron Gordon's battle in 2000. What was that? 15 or 16 now? 2016, I believe, was the first one where there was just a bunch of creativity. And I'm someone who prefers creative over just sheer amazing because in the first round, you seen the first couple dunks were off the side of the backboard, and I was like, okay, where's this going? Is there going to be absolutely no creativity? Granted, these dunks are cool and they're fun to watch, but like I enjoy the creative ones much, much more. And I thought that Diallo and Dennis Smith Jr. brought some creativity to it and really kind of livened things up. So overall, it was good. And then the All-Star game had a bunch of highlights, did what it was supposed to do, entertain the kids, entertain the fans, make a lot of good plays. It was okay. It was cool. It was good for what it is. But overall, great weekend. Also, salute to J. Cole for an awesome halftime performance. If you guys didn't see that, go look it up on YouTube. J. Cole did a phenomenal halftime performance, and I thought it was really one of the better J. Cole performances that I've personally ever seen. So I really enjoyed that, and go check that out. But now let's get to the more serious stuff, and let's get to the second half of the season is what it's called. But really it's the last third of the season, as every team has anywhere from 20 to 26 games left on the season. So let's kind of shake things out. So I broke it down into a few storylines on what to watch for. So with this podcast, we're going to because these are conversations that we're going to be visiting every single week. We're gonna just kind of set the stage. That's what this podcast will be, is to kind of set the stage for the rest of the regular season. Now, I have this divided into the East and West lower playoff races. Can these teams separate themselves? Who does? The other interesting storyline is, where does Indiana fall? Because that has big repercussions in the Eastern Conference standings. Because I think if they remain 3, that forces Boston and Philly to battle it out in the first round, and that also gives a team like Detroit, Charlotte, whoever, Brooklyn, a chance, or even Miami, depend on if they make a run. Whatever team ends up with that 6th seed, if Indiana holds on to the 3, has an outside shot at getting to the second round of playoffs. So that could have major ramifications on the Eastern Conference playoff race. Also, what side of the bracket does Golden State end up on? Who's with them? That will be very interesting, because the West is very fluid from 4 on down. The top 3 have a decent space. There's 4 games between seed 4 and seed 3 currently, so there's a nice separation there. Just like in the East, there's a really huge separation between the first 5 teams and then the next 3. But that's where the drop off in the West happens, is after 3. So all those seeds are all pretty much jumbled within a game per spot, pretty much. So there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching, and we really won't know probably until the final day of the season what the matchups will be in the West. So let's kind of get to it. We'll start with the Eastern lower conference playoff race, and that is Charlotte, Brooklyn, Detroit, Miami, Orlando, and Washington are all competing for 3 spots. 6 teams, 3 spots. Currently, the 3 that are holding it through tiebreakers and record are Charlotte, Brooklyn, and Detroit, respectively. Actually, sorry, Brooklyn is flipped before Charlotte. So Brooklyn 6, Charlotte 7, Detroit 8. And then Miami is tied with Detroit, but Detroit has the advantage, the tiebreaker advantage. And Orlando's right there behind them, a half a game, and Washington is a couple games back. So of these teams, like, what I did is I looked at all their schedules and I kind of compared it and kind of mapped it out in my head. Now, of course, so much of this is totally fluid, but I think it's worth noting that Detroit has by far the easiest schedule of the 6 teams. However, they are probably amongst the least trustworthy of teams right up there with Washington and Orlando and Charlotte. Those are all teams that are very untrustworthy and have had great stretches and have had horrible stretches. Now Detroit's playing great as of recently. Credit to Reggie Jackson. He's had a nice surge. Also, I want to shout out Aaron Johnson. He wrote a fantastic piece on Reggie Jackson and how his impact has, or how his recent increase in performance and level up in performance has really helped the team. That was a great read, so check that out. That's Aaron Johnson. But Orlando's playing great recently as well. I don't know if that holds up, especially because of the trade they made shipping out Jonathan Simmons, who was a player I really liked in Orlando. And Fultz, we don't know when he's coming into the picture or if he's coming into the picture. We really don't have any word on that at the moment. So, and when he does come back, that could be a very, very big distraction that Orlando might not be ready to handle and the team might not be ready to handle. Washington is an absolute dumpster fire, so I'm counting them out, even though they're technically only two games back. And Miami is the sole team to watch to me of the three outside. I would put Miami as really the team that, if any of those teams have a shot at getting in the playoffs, which they all do theoretically. I guess I'm being too dismissive of some of these teams, but Miami to me is the one that really has the best shot because they have a great coach and they have a deep roster and they've had great stretches in the year, and they've shown recently in the past with a pretty similar roster their ability to flip the switch. Plus they have the momentum behind them of this is Dwayne Wade's last dance, so they have that little internal motivation to chase the playoffs, which would be cool to see Dwayne Wade in the playoffs one last time. None of these teams are locks to me as far as holding the playoffs. Like, I don't consider Detroit and Charlotte a lock. I would consider them favorable to make the playoffs, both of those teams, but I wouldn't consider them a lock. The closest thing to a lock to me is Brooklyn, because they've been playing well for about a month and a half, 2 months now, and Spencer Dinwiddie is still coming back at some point this season. So when he comes back, that will really help. That will really help the Nets. So I think Brooklyn has a real shot, and the safest shot. Like if I had to project forward, I would imagine that Brooklyn ends up with the 6th seed, despite them having a much harder record, schedule than Detroit. But I still think Brooklyn, just their ability to win those close games, and they've been frisky all season long and they played well all season long. So I definitely think that they have a real shot at making the playoffs. I would put them as the number one favorite of those teams, and then followed again, of course, by Detroit, Charlotte, and Miami. The West playoff race is pretty simpler. Lakers are 3 games out, so LeBron, there's been a lot of quotes and a lot of conversations about LeBron. I think he's about to flip the switch and make the leap, and I'm just not counting LeBron out of the playoffs yet. 3 games is a lot to make up in the West just because of how good the Western Conference is, but I don't see the Lakers not making the playoffs right now. I see them edging out the Clippers or possibly the Spurs. The Spurs could fall out too, because despite playing well the last couple months of the regular season, they played well in December and January, but February they've kind of slacked off a bit. So I'm wondering what San Antonio is going to be like, if the team we saw in December, January is the real Spurs, or was that just a hot stretch? So that's something to watch for. Utah, I think, again, has a very easy schedule. And shout out John Schumann of NBA.com. He has a whole article up ranking and breaking down every single team's schedule in terms of difficulty and just kind of making his analysis. It's a great guide to read along to as you're kind of following this podcast here. But Utah has a very, very easy schedule. They have pretty much the easiest among Western Conference teams. So I would expect them to make a push and maybe end up as high as the 4th seed in the conference. But to me, they're a lock. The only 2 teams I would consider right now in the playoffs that are that have a real shot at falling out are San Antonio and the Clippers. But with the Kings and the Lakers right on the heels of them, there's a possibility to me that both the Kings and the Lakers get in, but history tells us usually that only one of those teams make the playoffs. At this late in the season, that one of those teams hangs on and one of them falls out. If one of them does, I should say. So that's something to really look forward to. But the interesting thing to me with this whole Western Conference is the Golden State bracket, right? That's to me the crown jewel. So according to John Schumann, the Golden State Warriors have the basically middle of the pack, the most average schedule going ahead moving forward. And I think that they're a team that's capable of winning 25 in a row. And really they could honestly win out, the rest of the season. I wouldn't expect them to, just because of their focus and their determination is set on the playoffs, and they'll let some games slip. But for the most part, I would say that with Golden State having a very middle of the pack record, so not or schedule, not hard but not easy. And then Denver having the second hardest schedule left among Western Conference teams, I think leads them, the Golden State Warriors, to have favor in finishing out the conference as the number one seed, making the 4 or 5 seed very, very unappealing. And if you're some teams like Houston's different because James Harden is going for the MVP, and he's not going to get it as a 6th seed, so he's got to get to top 3. So it doesn't make sense for Houston to kind of fall out of the playoffs. But I could totally see a team like Portland just saying, "Man, we played Golden State so many times in the playoffs. Let's fall back. Let's kind of fall back and hope that things go our way, and we get OKC or Denver in the second round of the playoffs, because that's obviously just not Golden State, and that's a much easier road to the Western Conference Finals and a chance to go much deeper in the playoffs. So that's really the interesting thing for me to watch moving forward. Golden State Warriors, where they end up will vastly determine how the Western Conference shakes out. I know there's a lot of talk right now about how great Denver and OKC are playing, and that Houston, if they could just get healthy and find their rhythm, maybe this is the year that Golden State gets knocked out. I don't see it. I like OKC. I think they're probably the best threat to Golden State just because of the sheer defense and physicality that they can play with. And Golden State is a team that's always struggled with physicality, especially in the playoffs. But that being said, I still just don't think at the end of the day OKC has the talent to get over the hump against Golden State. Nobody does when you have 5 All-Stars on one roster, especially with Boogie pretty much getting better each game. It seems like that really can make things very difficult come playoff time, especially because Boogie is now now somebody who can bang with Steven Adams, which was OKC's one real edge over Golden State was their rebounding and their physicality, and DeMarcus Cousins drastically changes that. So I'm really wondering how, if any, team could beat Golden State in the Western Conference. But if I had to pick any team that did it, it would be OKC, I think. Especially for sentimental reasons too. Like Westbrook just really, really, really wants to beat OKC, and I think Paul George does as well. So there's that little bit of external motivation, and that can play a factor in the playoffs. But that's it, really. The other thing I wanted to touch on too that I didn't really talk about is the top of the Eastern Conference. Now, again, the big deal with this is if Indiana remains 3, which, looking at their schedule, they have a very brutal schedule coming up. They have a really, overall, I know John Schumann gave it a tough schedule. I would say it's tough to middle of the pack because even though they have a brutal month where they play OKC, Boston, Houston, Golden State, they play all these teams. Yet, despite that, they also have a lot of cushion games around that. So they have a very bad stretch where from pretty much mid-March to early April, They have just brutal game after brutal game. The Bucks as well are on that list. I believe I said Houston, but if I didn't, Houston's on that list. So they got a ton of tough games ahead of them. But then they close out with Miami, who could also be tough because they're fighting for a playoff spot. But also, if they're out of the playoffs, that could be an easy one. And then I'm blanking on the other. I believe it's Washington. And Washington at that point I expect to be totally out of the playoffs and just playing for nothing. So it does kind of soften those last two games. And usually the way history goes is those last 2-3 games actually become very, very important in terms of seeding. So my guess is that Indiana will fall to fourth or fifth because I think Boston will rise in the standings. And that will be huge because that will avoid the four best teams are clearly Boston, Toronto, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia. Definitely not in that order, but those are the four best teams in the East. Now that Victor Oladipo is out with the injury, that kind of takes Pacers out of the mix for that conversation. So if Indiana were to remain 3, it would really mess things up because the Celtics and the 76ers would have to play each other in the first round, and that would be an absolutely brutal series, and one that I think both teams are definitely trying to avoid in the first round because those are both teams that if they go home in the first round, that is some major issues. Boston with Kyrie being a free agent going in the first round, that could be a very big deterrent in him going to New York or LA or wherever he wants. And Philly, if they lose in the first round, do you really think that ownership is going to justify spending and getting Jimmy Butler and Tobias? Or do you think they're going to take the simple way out and choose one? Or do both of them go because that's a team that really couldn't make it and they fell apart and they turned on each other at the end and things of that nature? So there's big implications because Indiana could very well be, by remaining the 3 seed, they could essentially break up a potential dynasty in the Boston Celtics or the Philadelphia 76ers. So there's a lot at stake. Also, that allows teams like Charlotte, Detroit, Brooklyn, and Miami, whoever gets those last couple of spots, whoever gets that 6th seed and matches up with Indiana, if they remained a 3 seed, that gives them a real shot. All of those teams, I think, have a real shot at winning the series against Indiana. I don't think I'd pick any of those teams in a series against Indiana, but I could definitely see them having a shot in it going 5, 6, maybe even 7 games. And then when you get to a game 7, anything can happen, especially if you're a team like Detroit or Brooklyn that have deep rosters and can play very well. So I think that there's a real potential concern for that. So there's major implications. Now right now Indiana is only 1 game up on the Boston Celtics, and I believe Philadelphia is tied with them in record. Let me actually double check that as we speak. So I'm checking right now to see if the standings, how the standings shake out, if Boston is the clear number 1 or if Philly is right behind them. I believe last I checked it was the standings were 1 game apart, Boston and Philly themselves, and that's what it currently is. So yeah, so moving forward, it is just a 1 game difference. So that's still 2 games away from the 3rd seed. So Boston or Philly, whatever team ends up with the 3 seed, but one of those teams have to end up with the 3 seed, or else they're forced to be a bloodbath, and neither of those teams can accept going home in the first round. Now, both of those teams, I think, can accept going home in the second round, although it'd be disappointing. You just have to chuck it up to the belly of the beast because Milwaukee and Toronto, and again, Milwaukee, Toronto, Boston, Philadelphia, these all 4 teams are legitimate contenders to make it to the NBA Finals. But if you lose to one of them in the second round, I think you can kind of sell it to Kyrie saying, hey, look, now we're going to get Davis, and there's nobody that could touch us, and maybe Kawhi leaves, and and then it's just really Milwaukee and Philadelphia, and maybe Philadelphia, flares out because of personality issues because they got eliminated early. Or if Philly gets eliminated early, like I said, those personalities clash and things blow up that way. And then they kind of have to reset on the fly. And so there's some major implications on both sides as far as the playoffs go. So it'll be very, very interesting to watch. That's the number one thing I'm watching for. But of course, I'm rooting for my Pistons to snag one of those last few playoff spots, especially in an ideal world. The Pistons play the Pacers in the first round. And that's clearly not happening with a 4-5, by the way. There's a 7-game gap between 5 and 6. So that difference is just way too vast for any team to catch up. Unless it would have to be historically poor performances from multiple teams and historically great performances from multiple teams to match that out and change that. So the top 5 are basically locked in. It's just a matter of order. But that's all I have for everyone today. Thank you for listening to the Platte NBA Minute. Once again, I want to shout out Sports Radio Detroit for having me do this series. I love doing this series. I love talking hoops with y'all. I got some things in the work. I got some ideas for this show that you could see as early as next week's episode that I'm really, really excited for. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, if you like the content I do on here, I also have a hip-hop review channel, hip-hop review podcast, actually, called The Last Track Review, and that is on Sports Radio Detroit as well, so check that out. Plus, Detroit Sports Radio has a bunch of content that you can offer, everything from hockey, baseball, football. They got it all, pop culture, everything. You name it, they got it. Check it out. Give us 5 stars on all platforms, Spotify, Apple. Actually, I don't know if Spotify does a 5 stars, but whatever you got to do on Spotify, share it, promote it, however you can. Is greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for listening, and I will see you next week for some more NBA talk. Yeah.
This has been an SRD production.
Because I feel like a salad tossing might feel good.
What?
Out of Bounds Detroit podcast. Tuesday morning and Friday mornings here on SportsRadioDetroit.com.